So one of the things, we really appreciate the opportunity to work with the Chamber. This is a really special community, and you can tell that the community is a special place. First of all, you have engagement from people in the community, as witnessed by all of you being here this morning. We have probably the best chamber in the country. Thank you. This chamber, if you haven't interacted closely with them, Roy and the team of professionals, better than any other chamber, who are out every day really working hard to make sure that this is a great environment for our businesses to operate in. And we appreciate what you do, Roy and team. We're also blessed to have leaders who are willing to step up to volunteer in organizations like you, David, thank you, but also people who are willing to make sacrifices, spending time in Washington away from your family, and who work every day to make our lives better, both in Oklahoma and for our country. Congressman Russell, we appreciate the sacrifices you and your family make, and we look forward to your remarks. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you for what you do for the Chamber too, Percy. Twice a year, the Chamber hosts these Chamber breakfasts, Chamber events, so that Oklahoma elected officials can come and share their perspectives with us on what's going on at the legislature, what's going on in Congress, on the key issues that affect businesses and affect our state and our economy and our nation. During today's breakfast, we'll engage with Congressman Russell, and he is our newest member, as you know, of the U.S. House of Representatives, and get his initial viewpoints on what's going on in D.C. The Chamber has started a new program that is a seminar to facilitate new candidates and encourage new candidates to run for office and to orient them towards the task that will be before them. This is called Practical Politics, and it was created as a half-day seminar. It'll take place, the inaugural event will be on October 21st at the Gardner Conference Center at OCU, and like the name implies, we'll talk about the practical steps that candidates need to go through to run for office and to be successful. And we firmly believe at the Chamber, and we believe it because you all told us that we need to get more active in candidate recruitment, and we are stepping forward to do that, and this is kind of our first foray into making sure we've got candidates that are ready to run and ready to represent your interests at the legislature. Okay, now let's enjoy breakfast, and we'll get back together in just a moment and talk with Congressman Russell. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. We all know that Congressman Russell is a native Oklahoman, graduated Dell City High School. This wasn't in his resume, but I happen to know that in a moment of group clairvoyance, the senior class there elected him most likely to succeed, and they nailed it. Good job. After graduating from high school, he earned his public speaking degree from Ouachita Baptist University and completed the ROTC program there. He then began a 21 career in the U.S. Army that we've all heard about and read about. Went through Ranger School, deployed to assignments in the Arctic, Desert, Pacific, Europe, operationally to Kosovo, Kuwait, Afghanistan, and Iraq. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, he commanded the unit that played a key role in the capture of Saddam Hussein, and was well documented in his book, which is entitled, "We Got Him, a Memoir of the Hunt and Capture of Saddam Hussein." Congressman Russell retired and returned to Oklahoma with his wife Cindy and their 5 children, and served in the state Senate from 2008 to 2012. He led efforts to protect the unborn, combat human trafficking, support veterans benefits, and reform the adoption process. In fact, something he knows a lot about, he and Cindy have adopted 3 children of their own. He's a businessman, owns Two Rivers Arms, a small rifle manufacturing business. And you may have read that his product was used in American Sniper, the movie. He was elected last November to represent the 5th Congressional District and serves in D.C. on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, Government Oversight and Reform, and also on the House Armed Services Committee. He and Cindy live in Choctaw and are members of First Southern Baptist Church of Del City. Please welcome me, or please help me welcome our speaker this morning, Congressman Steve Russell.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, good morning. It's great to see all of you this morning, and I appreciate you coming. You know, we often get asked, why can't you guys get anything done in Congress? A lot of it is perception, and you know this. I mean, I look out at this room, and I see just the impact that the people in this room have on our community. It's enormous. And we have a room full of leaders, a room full of contributors, people that give of their time to improve our city, our community, our state, whatever it might be. And with that, you know, you're always going to have these naysayers. You come up with an idea or you come up with something, you see a vision, you know you can get things done. And then people are like, well, I don't think that's going to work. And it's like, okay, tell me why. Well, this, that, and the other. It's like, yeah, we've thought about that, and we think we can fix that. And it doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to have these, people with such cheery encouragement, to rain on your parade. And we look at Congress much the same way. Politics is kind of one of our favorite shooting sports. We have this notion that it doesn't matter who we elect or what we do, it's not going to change. Well, Solomon said in Proverbs, without a vision, the people perish. And that's true. And so if all we can do is elect people that we think might be able to do something, and then they go to Washington and they become them, and then it doesn't matter what we do, and that we can't change our government or our country, then what's the point? What's the point of having a representative republic? And I think it's a give and take. I look at the electorate here, and you've entrusted me to represent you in Congress, and by the same token, I trust you to have my back or to tell me the things that you need and would like to see get solved. And so you kind of got this give and take. It's not always going to match up, but a lot of times it will. And I want to share a few facts with you about this 114th Congress. In the last 30 years, we've seen some interesting things. The last 30-year average in Congress has seen about 7.4% of the bills that have been introduced come out of committee. This Congress is over 10%. So it's a lot more accountable. We see it more open. The 30-year average for floor amendments that allows an open process before the cameras, before the American public, where anybody's bill can be amended and you have a chance to interact with it. The 30-year average is 200 floor amendments by this point in Congress. The 114th Congress has had over 400 floor amendments. And the American public doesn't watch that. I mean, they might see something occasionally, channel flipping, but they don't really follow the data and the facts about the work that we're doing. The 30-year average is 125 bills passed out of the House by this point in the year, in the session of Congress. The 114th Congress has not had 125, it's had 190, far, far above the 30-year average. It's been the second most effective Congress that we've had in 30 years. And yet you talk to the people, oh, they're not getting anything done. You know, they're not doing anything up there. Well, what are they thinking? Now they're on vacation, right? I wouldn't know what that word means. You know. As you come home, you're on your district work week, and you're working. And it's important that you do. That's what you have elected us to do, is to be a part of that. 29 bills, in fact, I think it's more than this now, have already become law and signed by the president. And that's with a Republican-controlled Congress with a president that pretty much doesn't like the party that's in control of Congress. And yet we've still managed to get 30 bills signed into law. Would we like more? Yeah, a lot more. Do we have more bills on his desk waiting? Yeah, we do. But you get nothing if you do nothing. And if you don't try to improve things, then what is the point? Here are some things that we will see hit the president's desk. The REINS Act. What is that? It's basically a bill that says if any agency or any department of the executive branch makes a rule change that impacts more than $100 million by its implementation, for example, EPA and air standards, right? We've seen that in the news lately. If that has more than $100 million worth of impact, the REINS Act says that it has to be approved by Congress. We passed that in the House this last week. It's now being sent to the president because it was already taken up in the Senate. There'll be some back and forth on it. The president may not sign it, but we're going to keep sending things like that. The VA Accountability Act. What do we do with that? Well, it allows these senior executive service officials to be fired if they're not doing their job. These SES positions are pretty important. They're equivalent in rank in the government system to brigadier generals to 4-star level. SES 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what was happening with these, they would be in charge of regions of the country, and they were not taking care of our veterans. In fact, I saw a sad but humorous bumper sticker on the back of a pickup truck, and it says, the VA, giving veterans a chance to die a second time for their country since 1932. You know? Sad, huh? And that's the perception that we have of the Veterans Administration sometimes. Now, we know there's a lot of good people that work and dedicate their lives in the VA, and we see it here in our own city. Do they have some problems? Sure. But if you've got bad managers or bad people, the VA secretary ought to be able to fire him. Well, until recently, he was not even granted that authority. So they would sit there and go, well, we were here before you got here, and we'll be here when you leave. And so nothing got done. The VA Accountability Act does that, and it also broadens on how veterans can be treated in different communities. And then we did a 3-month extension to the highway bill. It's always tough when you're filing these extensions, but the alternative is that in your most productive time during the summer to get things built, you've got to keep things rolling. So we did that to move it out to October 29th. What we would like to see is a 5 to 6 year outlay for our transportation, because that's one of the core functions of government. I mean, we ought to be able to build roads and bridges, and that's what we expect our tax dollars to go towards, and we all kind of agree with that. So we're going to continue to work on those measures. We're faced with a lot of interesting foreign policy decisions right now. I will be making a trip to Israel on Saturday. I will have a chance to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu during the trip. A lot of people are very concerned about Iran and this deal. And I've got to tell you, my own opinion about it is that it is dangerous not only for our national security, but it is dangerous for the world. I'm stupefied to think that for 34, 5 years, we've seen a country that hates the United States and hates everything that we stand for, and we believe we can just turn around and trust them. And we're told by the Secretary of State and others that, well, we're only going to deal with the nuclear pieces here. We're not going to, we can't do it all. We're going to just deal with the nuclear pieces, the most dangerous, and we're going to pretend these other things don't exist. That's like an embezzler coming to get a major loan from one of your banks or something. You say, well, he's only embezzled in these categories. He's never embezzled in this area before, so we think he's good for the loan, and we're going to trust him. I don't think so. And then people say, well, all right, what's the alternative? The alternative is a better deal. And how would we do that? Well, nearly everyone in this room is old enough to remember, although you've probably forgotten, we've rejected nuclear treaties before. Richard Nixon in his era, if we don't sign the SALT Treaty, we're going to have nuclear war. We rejected the SALT Treaty. And what did it result in? A better deal. Congress rejected it, despite all of the rhetoric. The START Treaty, there was another one. If we don't do the START Treaty, we're going to have nuclear holocaust. Congress rejected the START Treaty, and what did we get? A better deal. And so this precedent, that people will try to forget history. I have a bad habit of remembering history. I've got a master's degree in it, and there's amazing, Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. And there's not. Human dynamics and people, they're doing the same things over and over and over. And although history is not a template for future outcomes, it is a measuring stick to see what your options are, what the possibilities are. And so I will tell you that on this Iran nuclear deal, not only is it possible for us to stop it, it is also possible for us to do something better. How do we know that? We heard the same rhetoric in the 1990s with North Korea. Look, we need to engage these people. If we do that and do inspections and we have the IAEA come in and we do this, that, and the other, and then what happened with North Korea? They led us along. They lied. We brought everything back, and then what? And then the whole world smacked down upon them. We thought we could engage them, but we should have looked at their previous behavior as a predictor of what the possibilities are. So with Iran, we have to do everything that we can to try to stop that. And I will tell you this, I have been working very, very closely with the speaker, John Boehner. Oh, wow. That guy, he's the problem. You got to get rid of that guy, right? I mean, I hear it all the time. Well, it's like, okay, that is a view, and that is something that people have, and they have the information. I work with him, I meet with him, and we're developing a very good strategy to try to defeat the Iran nuclear deal. So what should we rather do? Should we focus on nuclear holocaust right now or play political gymnastics? What do you think? Which is better for the country? And I know I probably lost some votes. Well, there it is. I've always tried to be honest with you. Right now, the most important thing that we could possibly do is determine the outcome of this Iranian deal, because if we don't, it will shape potentially this entire century. Your grandchildren, the generations to come, our security, all of that. We have to focus on the things that are most important rather than political stunts and maneuvers. And there may be good leaders and bad, but I learned in the military that even if you have a bad leader, if you violently execute a poor plan with 100% of effort, you probably get it done. But if you wait around for the perfect leader and perfect plan, you're going to get defeated because of hesitation and quibbling and back and forth. I wish as a nation that we would unify rather than fight one another when it becomes so crucial on issues that matter to all of us. Well, with that, I want to really just take your questions. I know you, rather than play whack-a-mole and try to figure out what it is that you wished you would have heard this morning, I want to field some questions, and then I'll try to answer to the best of my ability. So who will pull the pin on the first grenade and throw it out there? And we got some microphones in the audience, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Good morning, Congressman.
Anyone? Here we go.
I have a question. First of all, thank you for your service in the Iraq War. And while speaking about the Iraq War, what lessons could we take from that war to deal with ISIS now and bring some stability to the Middle East?
No, that's a great question. I think the lesson that we should have for any war, let's have debate, let's have disagreement, let's have passion. But once we have a decision, let's get behind whatever it was we decided. I think that's the lesson from the Iraq War. I can tell you that we defeated Saddam's army, overthrew the Ba'athist government, we captured Saddam Hussein, we stabilized Iraq, we went through 3 successful elections, we set it up where it could have worked, and then our nation abandoned the effort. That is a fact. And so now, what do we do with that abandonment? We're paying the consequences for it. How do we deal with ISIS? I've been very critical of the president with his ISIS strategy because he lacks one. I made a speech on the House floor poking fun, and I'm not making up this term. It's an actual term that they use, the lily pad strategy. Boy, that'll incite fear in your enemies. Oh my gosh, they're attacking us with the lily pad strategy. We're doomed. We're all going to die. When you've got your chairman of the Joint Chiefs and your Secretary of Defense threatening you with the lily pad strategy, we've probably lost our way. And so I called out these things, and I got asked a question on some national news shows. So you're so smart, what would you do? I said, well, okay, how about drop leaflets on Raqqa and say you've got 72 hours, we're going to start hitting your infrastructure. And you're not targeting innocents. You know, we go through great pains to prevent collateral damage, but you take where their center of gravity is. Drop the bridges and mess up the roads that come in and out of that town. Take out their electrical grids, make life difficult for them. Well, it was interesting because 10 days after I made this floor speech, probably coincidence, they struck 16 targets on Raqqa on a Sunday, targeting all of those very things. We have to develop a strategy with ISIS because if we don't, can you imagine in the 21st century that we allow barbarous acts of this nature, where you have people that believe that it is actually moral to saw off people's heads on television, to immolate people in cages, to take young women and sexually enslave them. That ought to bring out all Americans to say, we have to stop this. And who cares what the rest of the country, what the world is going to do? You know, where the United States doesn't lead, people don't follow. And they won't go in themselves. Where we do go, they do follow. I mean, whether we like it or not, that's just the way that it is. You see it in business dynamics, you know. What's the industry leader doing? And people will try to compete with that, or they'll follow that, or they'll try to do different things. Same way with our responsibilities in the United States. We don't really have a choice on that. So we do have some options with ISIS. Recently, you had the Arab League that came out, and they talked about developing like a NATO-like defense or coalition. And the United States, rather than saying, you know, that's interesting, let's have more discussions about that. Not making a commitment, but, you know, encouraging discussion. Instead, the president condemned it. He says, no, we're not, that's a terrible idea. It's like, okay, well, you know, there's Mr. Cheerful again, you know, dousing any hope for dialogue and solution. But we have to have some that gets us to that because they have to be willing to solve the problems themselves. Unfortunately, as I sat and listened to Secretary Kerry and Secretary Lew and our Secretary of Energy and others, it dawned on me 2 weeks ago, these people really honestly believe that a nuclear-capable Iran, not necessarily nuclear-armed, but nuclear-capable Iran is key to stability in the Middle East. How many of you believe that? I didn't think so. I mean, that's scary. And so we have to be able to deal with these issues head on, and we're going to continue to try. Other questions? Foreign policy always gets people in such a good mood in the morning, doesn't it? Okay, we got one over here. Yes, sir.
Morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
You talked a little bit about the relative effectiveness of the current Congress in number of quantity of bills passed. I think our audience would also be interested in measuring the effectiveness of the current Congress in the types of bills passed to improve the business climate in our country, as well as improve our personal freedoms here.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of things we would have liked the president to have signed. XL pipeline, for example. He vetoed it. We got it to his desk. What folks don't realize is, I think, to the effect, the president wields a lot of power, any president. And he has vetoed a lot of good measures that we have sent that would improve the business community, that would reform Dodd-Frank, that would eliminate the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that would do oil and gas exports, that would do. We've sent all of these measures to his desk. Vetoes them. And unless we get veto-proof majorities, which is 290 votes in the House, 66 in the Senate, then it stands. And part of the reason that we get a little bit of angst in Oklahoma is that in the Oklahoma Constitution, our executive is, by design, a weak executive. I don't mean the personality of who's there. I'm not implying that at all. It's by the Constitution, they have limited power, and our legislature has greater power, and then we have an awful lot of ballot initiatives, and the people can petition and put things on the ballot, and we've seen that happen many times in our Oklahoma history. And so we have this notion that if we want to change something, by golly, we'll just do it. And we do, with or without our governors, and we've seen episodes of that on occasion in our history. Federally, let me tell you, it's not that way. The president, if you can't get a veto override, he's going to stop it. And they say, well, what about the power of the purse? We have withheld funds. We have done different things as we get to appropriation, and we will continue to do that. We look at the gap, right? It's kind of like raising kids, right? You're always looking at, well, why don't you do this, that, and the other? Well, but they're not doing all of this, right? And in the same way, when we look at, as I walked home from a 10.5-hour committee meeting one night, being called all kinds of hateful things by the opposing party, it dawned on me, I thought, what would it be like if we weren't here? Ponder that for a moment. If we weren't there to put ideas in people's heads, to pass legislation, to do different things so that we could try to do that. I guess my part, in fact, we were enjoying a discussion here earlier this morning. I got asked to fix a fire hose issue. No kidding. Because the fire hose and the fibers due through some draconian thing with the Government Services Agency, and they had flipped from Department of Defense to the GSA, and now you couldn't make fire hoses anymore the way we used to. And so I got asked by my constituency if we could fix the fire hose issue. And you know what we did? Saved a lot of jobs for the blind in doing that. And it had a multi-million-dollar impact over time. And then our firemen, actually, when they come to your house, they'll have a hose, to be able to put something out. Now, did that make national news? No, it didn't. Would you expect it to? No. And was I going to go around trumpeting, I saved fire hoses in America? I mean, it's like, but it's what you would expect us to do, right? To do our jobs, to do the things that have an impact and that matter. But we have done a lot of those measures, and we're also trying to continue, like the RAINS Act, to take away measures that if it has this big impact, it has to come directly to Congress. But we will continue to take not only your input. If we don't get it done this year, we'll continue to hammer away next year and the next year. But I will tell you, presidential elections do have consequences. And if you get an executive that has the opposite view over what business does or different things, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the Congress of any party to be able to do that. And that's the environment that we see right now. Good question. Other question? Mr. Secretary Speaker.
Good morning, Congressman. Good
How
to
are
see you
you?
again. I think the last time I saw you, maybe we were out on a rig tour.
We were out climbing on an oil rig, that's right.
My question would be about clean power, the Clean Power Plan. That obviously has hit the radar of state officials here, governor, attorney general, the legislature. Great concern on our part as to what's potentially coming down the pike. How can we defeat that? And I think my editorial comment would be it's not the irony on how it's going to affect middle and low income citizens is not lost. Right. But could you speak to how we can possibly defeat that plan?
Sure. Right now we're waiting to see what exactly, I mean, the president has rumbled this week about actions that he will be taking, may be taking. And it's the parts per billion. You know, he's wanting to lower it down. I think it's to around 60 parts per billion in the air with some of these regulations. And by doing that, it's going to have a huge impact. In some states like West Virginia and Missouri, I mean, they draw a lot of their electrical power off of coal. And they already burn very clean coal. I don't know what the overall impact exactly will be, but it will be devastating, and we will see higher electric prices. We will see higher energy prices as a result. And a lot of it is based upon different views of science and you know, greenhouse gases. I mean, now I'm reading about how the world is getting ready to have a freeze in the near future. And you know, so what was it? I mean, last year it was the world was going to be on fire. You know, now it's going to be. And we see these regulations come down. Part of, again, what we've tried to do is address it in the RAINS Act. The other thing that we can deal with is with appropriation riders, which I know you would be familiar with from your time as the Speaker of the House, where we can allocate funds or shift funds away from the implementation of those programs. That's probably what we're going to be left with, is where we earmark and say you cannot, well, not earmark, that's a bad word, but where we designate that these funds cannot be spent for these purposes, that money that is allocated to that agency can only be spent for these purposes. And that's how we've controlled things in the past. President will put out a regulation, but we just won't fund it. And that's probably what we're going to be left with. So great question. Other question?
Morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Kind of a foreign policy and a domestic business question. I just wanted to get your thoughts on keeping the Ex-Im Bank afloat and how you stand on that and how you think it's going to play out.
Oh, I appreciate the question. In fact, I've visited with a lot of you on the Ex-Im Bank. When I first entered Congress, if you would have asked me how I felt about the Ex-Im Bank, I would have been, you know, I just don't know that the government needs to be in that business. Is that one of the core functions of government, to be involved with the Ex-Im Bank? And then I have a bad habit of studying issues, and so as I began to look at it, it's one of the few entities that adds money to the coffers rather than takes away. So that got me to take a step back, and I said, okay, why would we want to kill a government anything that adds more money to the coffers rather than bleeds out? So that caused me to look at it a little more realistically. And then I thought, well, do we really want to have an entity where we give money to states that have, countries that have state-owned enterprises, you know, where they don't share our values and they don't share, you know, our free market principles? So could we make an Ex-Im Bank where it had provisions where it says, okay, we'll make these loans to these businesses so that they can get credit, and we can sell, parts or airplanes or whatever it might be, but not do it to state-owned companies so that we can, further free market principles. And that was a serious discussion. But then you got to ask yourself, well, what about countries like Zimbabwe? There's not private-owned anything in that whole country. So do you just not engage with Zimbabwe and you just leave them alone? They speak English and they have a dollar-based economy now and they're trying to do reforms and we're having warmer relations and maybe, so if we, and you can see where it goes, the struggle back and forth, back and forth. I will tell you I'm still undecided on the Ex-Im Bank, but where I was completely over here, I'm now in the middle, probably leaning more towards it than against it. That's not vacillation. I have no problem making instant decisions. I have no problem making instant decisions when I feel I've got the facts. I had to do it to survive. I had to do it where my decisions resulted in people living or dying on a battlefield. So I don't have any problem with vacillation or making decisions. But I want to make informed decisions, and if you have time to deliberate, guess what? You should deliberate, and we have time. Now, I've also been asked, well, what happens if they put the Ex-Im Bank in a transportation bill or something like that? It would not cause me to vote against the transportation bill, whether I was for or against the Ex-Im Bank, if it were put in a rider, because I think that the core functions of government, that we have to have transportation measures. But in terms of the Ex-Im Bank, you're probably going to see a 5-year provision, and you'll try to see some types of amendments added to it about, I intend, if it shows up in a bill, to put an anti-Iran rider on the measure. That's one I think we could all get behind, where we just don't deal with Iran. And so that would be an amendment that I would want to try to put on it. But that's where I'm at right now. I'll give you the benefit of my thoughts on it, and I'm going to continue to study it. I welcome information, but I've tried to be very honest with people on that issue. Other questions? Y'all ask good questions.
Hello. I have a question.
Okay.
Will there be any future bills about passing agriculture to each public school, like a recreational activity, or newer books, or just adding agriculture to each public school? That would be kind of cool.
Well, and it is. There's a lot of options that you can have. I know you've got several aspects with education. Most of those fall at the state level. When I worked in the state Senate, you would have an awful lot of the programs. You try to power those down and put the curriculums and you put the standards out to local school boards and local communities to the extent possible. I'm on the Education and Workforce Committee, first Oklahoman, and I don't know how many years it's been on that committee. I wouldn't want to see us do anything federally to impose any types of standards when it comes to the curriculums that we do. I think that would be a mistake. We do want the monies that they collect to be put back down to the states so that now we as Oklahomans can decide how we want our standards to be and how we want to school our children. And I think agriculture is obviously something that we need to continue to promote. And I'm sure that folks out in Stillwater would agree with that a great deal. But what I would caution, though, is that federally, we should not impose anything in terms of curriculum down to the states. I think we leave that to the people. There are some, especially my West Coast colleagues, that believe that we here in flyover country might benefit by their educational policies. And I remind them that our unemployment is 4.2 to 4.4%, and theirs is 7.8. And we don't seem to have as much of a problem taking our people from classroom to workforce, and we'll keep Oklahoma, thank you very much. I think sometimes we lose sight of that. But no, they are worthy efforts. I think we ought to try to promote things like that. But again, that really is largely a state issue. Other questions? How are we doing on time, David? Okay, we're fine. Give me the
Congressman
hook.
Russell.
You know, we'll keep going here.
Sir, thank you for your service in the military and also.
Wave, I can't see you. Where are you at? There. Okay, there you are.
Sorry. Thank you for your service in the military as well as in Congress.
Thank you.
Very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Our economy is chugging along, and I've watched as more and more tax dollars go to Washington, D.C., appropriated in various forms. What's the appetite from your observation to slow, even to stall, the growth of government? Because if this continues, obviously we can see what that end will lead to.
Well, I think the appetite's very, very strong. In fact, we've seen a number of entitlement reform measures that have gotten to the floor and actually been passed, gotten through. They either are, they haven't gotten cloture in the Senate, or they've made it to the president's desk and then he's vetoed them. We have to rein in government. It is too big. On education and workforce, I can speak to that. We have worked very hard to rein in the growth of programs that were well-intended but just went way beyond their scope, so that we keep drawing those circles wider and wider and wider. I'll give you an example. The free and reduced lunch program, oh my gosh, you know. And I can hear my political consultants, don't talk about that, it's political suicide. No, you know, we've got to be honest about things. And we've gotten to the point with that now that it's become a 24/7 feeding program on 200 percentile, 300 percentile poverty line. It was never intended for that. It was intended for those that needed it the most. And I think we would all agree with that. But do we want to keep drawing those circles wider and wider? $100 billion, of which 37% of that food ends up in the dumpster. Seriously, 37%. We can do better than that, and we should. And we have a responsibility to protect those dollars that you work so hard for and that the taxes go in. We collected more taxes in this last year than any time in the history of our country. So it's not a revenue problem. It is a spending problem. And we have to do it at every level. We're seeing it in the military. We're seeing it in core functions of other things that, you know, we're forcing people to do. The Army just cut another 40,000 troops. Now we'll be going down to 450,000. The last time we were that low was 1940. In raw numbers, we only had 180 million Americans in 1940. And 400,000 wasn't enough for what we were getting ready to get into before we passed the National Defense Act. Now we've got 300 and change million souls, and we got 450,000, same numbers. That's insane. And it also leaves us very vulnerable with, you know, with our wonderful foreign policy that we're, you know, spreading around the globe. A lot of concern about it. But we have to be able to rein in all of those aspects, and there is a lot of desire to do that. We don't always get it signed into law, but we do pass the bills, and we will continue to do that. And we have another year left, year and a half, of this Congress to continue to push those efforts, and we are. Good question.
Morning, sir. How you doing? I won't make any Army jokes if you don't make any Marine jokes.
Good morning.
My question is, given what happened in Chattanooga, and
Yeah.
I know you're a former commander, and that probably hits you at your core as well as it does mine. A lot of what you saw on TV was the bullet holes at the recruiting office, which really wasn't where we lost service members. We lost 4 Marines and a sailor at the Reserve Center. And then I'm hearing on the news that the Navy is considering punishing a lieutenant commander who returned fire.
Yeah.
What do we do to protect our folks here at home from things like that from happening?
We arm them. We arm them. And I applaud Governor Fallon for being the first governor to authorize the arming of National Guard recruiting stations. I told her that yesterday. Thank you for her leadership in doing that. People that are trained, you know, we're not saying that everyone carry weapons or would have some martial law, but, you know, if you can't trust a captain or a gunny sergeant or a first sergeant or a platoon sergeant or someone to be able to have some option at these recruiting stations, the world has changed. What am I personally doing? A couple of things. One I've brought out, with the Warriors Protection Act, which I filed as a bill. It would allow those military personnel who are trained and qualified to be able to have weapons for their own defense on installations. The regulations are there, but without the top cover of the Secretary of Defense, it's not likely to happen. And the second thing is Department of Defense civilians. Right here in our own community, we have police, Department of Defense police that are on bases, and when they walk off the base, not because of the state, but because of the federal regulations, when they walk off the base, they cannot carry their firearms. Well, now, how crazy is that? They are lawful federal trained policemen when they're on the base, but the minute they step off, they can't carry a firearm in the course of just traveling to and from to perform their duties. That's dumb, and we have to change that. And so the Warriors Protection Act, which I filed, will address that, and those are some of the things that I think we have to have. Copycats, ideologues, Islamofascists that are fomenting this hatred, or the Timothy McVeighs, who were soldiers that suddenly become enemies of the country and commit despicable acts of terror. We live in a newer world, and so we have to allow our military to have some defense of themselves when they're put in those terrible situations. They're trained. I mean, I went out to the range 2 days ago. I still shot the center completely out of a target with my pistol, and I'm a better shot with a rifle. We're trained to do those things, and so I think we can trust people to be able to defend themselves at our recruiting stations. They're very, very vulnerable. Well, I think I'm running about out of time. Okay, we have a lighter question from David.
And I don't have a microphone, so I'll speak up. Donald Trump, is there any takeaway from that phenomenon for someone like you? Is it good or bad for the GOP, and what's the end game?
Well, I think you have to look at why is he leading in the polls. Jeb Bush had commented that he's tapping into some of the anger that we see in the electorate. I think that there's some truth to that. I think the other reason is we see the left-leaning media that give him all of this press. Why? Because it's to their advantage to do so. They want to paint him as the face of conservatives. They want to paint the whole broad brush of all of the candidates that Donald Trump. I mean, I hosted a member of the British Parliament from the Labour Party, and she stayed with us a week ago, and we hosted her here in Oklahoma. It was wonderful. And she asked me to say, well, what's this thing with Donald Trump? And my only comment was, if I had $8 billion, I'd buy some hair. I mean, come on. You could afford to do almost anything, real hair, and get it. I'll tell you personally how I feel about the man. I think that all of the voters vote for people who they like and who they trust. And at the end of the day, that really is where we place a lot of our votes. People may like the brashness of the things that Donald Trump says because they feel like maybe we need to discuss these issues, and so he's pulling some things. But in terms of lack of civility and treatment of others, I've been a leader my whole life, from the time of my youth, and building teams, putting together. I mean, can you imagine running your enterprise with hatefulness and rudeness, and where your leadership style is one of draconian fear? Well, I'll tell you, you wouldn't get very far in the military that way. There are leaders like that, but they tend to fizzle out. I think people will look at that leadership style, and they'll look at this man and go, he's really kind of a beep, fill in the blank. And because of that, then they'll say, I'm not sure I'm ready to hand him the reins of the government. And I think that that will be the fate of Donald Trump. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not the font of all knowledge. But I know people do vote in their hearts for people that they like and people who they trust. It's interesting that in both parties in this Congress of freshmen that came in, there was a high number of ministers, doctors, and soldiers that were elected. Isn't that interesting? I wonder why that is. I think it's because they're like, well, gosh, I go to my doctor and I trust him. Maybe we ought to send him up there to straighten some things out. And well, my music minister, gosh, we've seen him for decades. He's an honorable man. They sent him to Congress. You're seeing that in the electorate now. They're voting for people who they trust and who they like, hoping that maybe something can be done, with the situation. And I think that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will have some issues with the trust and like piece. And then we'll see how the other 200 candidates fall out, in that race. I want to take one moment to recognize my able staff, a couple who are here. I have Craig Smith, who is my district director. I know all of you know him better than you know me, which is why I hired him. Craig, where are you at? Okay, he's in the back there, and I really appreciate his efforts. He does such great work. And we also have Rusty Dunnigan, who does so much of our casework and so much of our veterans coordination and veterans casework. And Rusty, give me a wave. Where are you at? He had to leave, okay, but he was here this morning. And I just want to thank my staff, because when I'm off being a congressman and trying to work for you, they're answering so many of the questions and getting so much done. Thank you for just a great dialogue this morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Whether or not you have, I've had a good time. And thank you for letting me join you this morning. God bless you. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here and for a life of service to community, to country, and now to state. Thank you, Percy and Cox Communications, for hosting this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you to each of you for being here. We're only as effective as you are engaged, and so we appreciate it. Everybody have a great day. See you later.